So you'll have a DD-214 from the Department of Defense. You'll have badges from your corporate access. You'll have stuff that can establish it. And that's what we require. But those folks need to come forward in a next wave of disclosure and defect from this criminal enterprise. Many of you, I'm addressing you now, don't know you're in a criminal enterprise because the way compartmented intelligence works, you have a guy at this desk doesn't know what the guy next to him is doing because it's special compartmented intelligence, top secret. And that's the way it works. They're in what are called silos. But I am telling you through these documents and this testimony that the way these projects are managed, it's illegal. And if it's illegal, they cannot cite you for violating the National Security Act. Now, Snowden disclosed information that the President and Congress did know about. That's different. I'm talking about disclosing information that is not being shared with the President or Congress and are a priori illegal. So the quotidian world of top secret, the sort of everyday world of top secret, I'm not talking about that. I'm only talking about unacknowledged special access projects that deal with the anti-gravity or gravity control, new energy, ET, UFO issue. Those things are being managed in a corrupt enterprise that's illegal. So you folks can speak to anyone, provide any material, take any document, like some of these that I have that are top secret that have not been declassified. No one's going to come after you. Now, I did have an FBI guy say to me once, he says, that's a top secret document. If you share that with anyone, each time you share it, it's however many years in prison and whatever zillion-dollar fine. I said, really? Come put the bracelets on. I said, because my first call, I was back when I'd been on Larry King, my first call is going to be the Ted Koppel, who I know, and Larry King and a few other people. The headline's going to be, emergency doctor gets arrested for disclosing top secret document that confirms UFOs and that you guys killed Marilyn Monroe. You want that the headline? Come get me. And he looked at me, he said, you're crazy. I said, yeah, like a fox. I said, it's your worst nightmare. This is your worst nightmare. So that's the other part of disclosure. Don't be a lone wolf. Don't be a Bill Colby. Do it. Come together with us, with a group of people, another 5, 10, 20, 30 people deep inside the transnational security state, the deep state, and come forward. That's what I'm calling for people to do. So that's one thing we can do. The other is to each of us form our own CE5 groups. How many people here are part of a CE5 contact group somewhere? I'm just curious. Yeah, so a few of you. The rest of you need to do that. We have an app. If you go to seriousdisclosure.com and scroll down to the second bottom half of the page, there's actually an app to train you in the remote viewing and the contact protocols. And then there's another app, a free app, that will show you who is on CE5 teams in your area. And so you can register on that, create a new email just for contact in CE5, and start going out under the stars doing this. Because here's the power of mass consciousness. Dr. John at Princeton, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, found that if one person put their awareness on a random number generator, they could shift the zeros to ones or the ones to zeros, just through their conscious effect. That's the power of the mind. Our minds have infinite power if we tap into that. If two people do it who love each other or are united, the effect was exponential, not arithmetic. It wasn't twice as much, it was 10 times as much. So when a group of people in higher consciousness go out for the purpose of making peaceful contact, understanding that our future is peace in the cosmos, and our destiny is to become extraterrestrials to other worlds eventually, where we will be interstellar. If you understand that, and then if you begin to do that, don't worry about what phenomenon happens. The process of doing it itself is transformative and edifying. So please go and do that. That's another thing you can all do. Now I want to take the last few minutes to just take a few questions. We've got about 15 minutes. And anyone who has a question in the audience, if you can just yell it out and I'll repeat it so everyone can hear it. Yes, Simeon.
You were one of the witnesses at the Citizen Hearing for Disclosure at the Press Club in 2013, just a few months ago. Do you think such an organization like that and those types of events help move people to vote hearings in front of either members of Congress or the president?
Yeah, he's asking about the hearings in front of Congress and this sort of thing. Here's the problem with that. In reality, we've already done that. We've already given the full dossier to every member of Congress. I am not sanguine that any member of Congress is going to hold a hearing on this. Even Kucinich, who ran for president in 2008, who had a sighting and a close encounter, he was outed by Shirley MacLaine, unfortunately. And I've known him for years. He became chairman of one of the subcommittees on government oversight, domestic. He wouldn't do it. Because the social opprobrium, condemnation, critical, ridicule, is so great on this subject. It's more likely that more and more people defecting and doing it through the new media and the internet would create a tidal. Now, at some point, either a contact event will happen that cannot be suppressed, or enough critical mass of people, a new wave of people defect where it just reaches critical mass. But for the president and the Congress to do it, they will only step in after we've done the very big heavy lift. So I think disclosure is in our hands, and in my opinion, in a sense, we've already done it. The majority of Americans believe we're not alone. 43% of Americans believe we're currently being visited by ETs. Two-thirds of the public believes there's intelligent life out there, and we've been historically visited. So in a sense, when I started the project, the numbers were like 20, 25%. So in a sense, we've won that issue. It's when people talk about disclosure, I say, well, in a sense, we've already done it. What hasn't happened is official disclosure. But the problem with official disclosure is that it's rare to find a politician who has the courage to make their way through the condemnation, the ridicule, or the threats. And the threats are serious. And that's why we had such great hope that Clinton, and by the way, when Lawrence was hosting, when we were doing this briefing for President Clinton and Hillary at the Rockefeller Ranch, you know who stood up and stopped it? Hillary. She said, it's too dangerous. We don't want to hear anything more about it, and we're not going to pursue it. So President Clinton took the briefing, this huge thing I put together, and kept it in the private quarters of the White House, in his bathroom, actually, to read. And he would occasionally bring it out. There was a person who used to live at the White House who's a friend of mine. And he says, yeah, he'd bring it out into the living room, and he went through and he'd go, I know all this is true, but they won't tell me a thing, not a goddamn thing. That's what he said. So, I just think that, for the chief executive or the Congress to do it, we're going to have to create contact events. And it's harder in America than any other country, because this country is the crown jewel. It's not that Magic doesn't have subsidiaries globally, but this country is the crown jewel of the military, industrial, financial, laboratory, technology complex dealing with this. All other countries are an order of magnitude down in terms of what they have. And so for a president or a congressman to really go full bore at this, let's just say I'm not holding my breath. I'm calling for it. I think it'd be great if it happened. But I think we're going to have to do a lot more of the groundwork ourselves. It has to be a mass public initiative, both making contact and bringing out more and more of these top secret witnesses before they will move off the dime. Yes, sir.
Do you know who the leaders of Magic are today?
Yes, I know a number. I've named a few. Some are recently deceased, some are still living. Like, Cheney's certainly a member. Papa Bush is a member. Some of these royal families have representation, but minor. All you have to do is look at the really top folks at the Lockheed Skunk Works, SAIC, Lockheed Martin. They're all involved. You have David Rockefeller, used to be Chase Manhattan Bank. That, by the way, that's why Lawrence, who was his brother, who was sort of the philosopher king of the family, he wanted disclosure and peaceful contact. David, with the banking empire, was jumping up and down on his, I won't say what he told me, his toes, and was furious.
You're saying that an officer of Lockheed, Northrop, or whatever, is a member of this group?
If they're directly involved in the skunk works and the cube, yes, they would absolutely have knowledge. And there are people within the military and CIA. I know people at the CIA who are a member of this group. And what's interesting, when I first did the meetings with the CIA director, about a third of MAGIC supported the concept of ending the secrecy and bringing this out. I've been told that the number is now 70% are in favor. And I've met with a number of them. They're more the younger generation. The problem is the other 30% would drop them dead just like they killed Bill Colby. So it doesn't take them. It's not a democratic system. It's who's willing to be a murderer, who's willing to kill who. So and the other problem is that this group, MAGIC, has elements that are splintered off of the main policy board, the main policy committee. So the folks who have gone off the reservation with electronic warfare systems, abductions, mutilations, those guys are in a paramilitary special operation, drug run. It's highly, and some of the people who are on the main, they don't actually have control over what those guys are doing. So people should get rid of the idea of some sort of top-down system. The architecture of this secrecy may have started that way, and much of it was under constitutional oversight with Truman and the early Eisenhower years. And then it went south. And it continues to go out of control, spinning out of control. So that's what you need to understand. Yes, sir?
I mean, does this group conceive of themselves as, people have talked about a breakaway civilization? I'm having a hard time getting my head around the end goal. Is it just endless warfare? The objective of warfare? What is it?
Okay, there are agendas within this group that are separate and competing, and sometimes they mesh. One would be macroeconomic global control. They want the oil system, the central utility system, and it's all a macroeconomic issue for those guys. Those would be more of the real politic folks like Papa Bush. Then you have the people who I mentioned are eschatologists. They would love to see a final battle happen that would result in the end of the world, so that their Messiah or their Christ or whoever would return. I mean, they're religious nuts. I mean, they make the Taliban look like liberals. Then you have an element that are sociopaths who really like endless war. They love torture. They like destruction. They're addicted to it. And I've met with some of these people. They are true psychopaths and they're scary characters. And then you have an agenda that has to do with the fact that they're not so much still attached to the secrecy, but they don't know how to come clean without it being the biggest scandal in the history of the United States and many other countries. Because imagine this information coming out and being confirmed, and the world learns that for 60 years we haven't needed oil or gas or coal, that there have been all these things done. I mean, one of their concerns is that it could result in so much social instability they wouldn't be able to manage it. So there's a sort of inertia to the secrecy, a momentum, and it's very hard to stop it. So those are people who are just sitting on the fence, who are placeholders, status quo holders. And a man that was good friends with W, I met with him at the University Club over here, and he was sort of his advisor on nuclear power and stuff like this. And he said, he says, I don't care if you're left, right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, when you get into that building, and we're just down the road, he was pointing at the White House, you govern as a conservative. I said, what do you mean? He said, you do not want to be in charge when something this big happens and manage that change. I said, I understand what you're talking about. I had an admiral who was in charge of CONUS, who was part of, and another guy named Admiral Harry Train, who became a member of MAGIC. You want names? I have a lot of names. And this guy said, well, CONUS is continental United States security. And he says, my job is to maintain the homeostasis of the world energy supply, just to have nothing disrupted. That's why we're in the Middle East so heavily. He says, and what you're saying is true. This should never have been kept secret. It should come out. But I just want to retire from this command and go fishing at my ranch out in, I think it was Montana or Wyoming. He says, I just want to get out of this position. So, you have to, live in their shoes for a minute. And I have a lot of compassion for that. A lot of these people have inherited this mess that got started. And this is why Senator Goldwater said to me, He said, you know, it was a goddamn mistake then, and it's a goddamn mistake now that this was ever kept secret. I'm quoting directly. I'm sitting in his living room. And, you know, so there are a lot of people who find themselves as placeholders, and they just don't want to disrupt the status quo. So there are different agendas for the secrecy. Some is global domination macroeconomically. Some have this quasi-religious sort of end times, you know, final battle in space nonsense. You know, it's almost like you get into the wackiness of science fiction, but it's real, this Dr. Strangelovian view. Some, it's all just about maintaining the status quo of how the world operates. Because imagine if every village in Africa and every place in India had a free energy device, they had electrification, refrigeration, crops could be grown under controlled environments with zero energy cost. You would have the 2.5 billion people in China and India, their economic output would be parity with the United States. We only have 300 million. So the U.S. and Europe only has 700 million. The rest of the world is 7 billion. Money flows to where economic prowess and power is, right? That's why America is the biggest economy. China is about to get there, but bestrides the globe. But this would change the macroeconomic thing overnight, almost overnight, certainly within a generation, 15 or 20 years. So those are folks who are looking at the reality of that kind of change and go, no, it's too big of a change. Now, that has been going on for 60 years or more. I mean, the secrecy on the energy stuff has been going on for 100. And that's what has led us to the precipice of an environmental meltdown and global injustice. And as more and more people are impoverished and more and more elite parasitic kleptocracy has the money, this is a prescription for global revolution and upheaval and terrorism. So the more we stay on this path, the harder it's going to be. So even though the change is daunting to take on, it's still the right thing to do. And the longer we put it off, the harder it's going to be. So my advice has been, for 20 years, meeting with people in high places, do it. But it's easier said than done. Another question. Yes, ma'am.
How can we help our children and future scientists of the world, future Tesla's who are growing up in this educational paradigm, who want to push and learn, and maybe they're being suppressed? What's the future of this education?
It's a great question. Yeah. How do we help our children and our educational system and get them into this new paradigm? You have to do it yourself. The system will take too long to catch up. It'll eventually get there. So when you start talking about the whole area of consciousness studies, high-tech sciences, you're not going to be able to get that at MIT or in your public schools. But we as parents can provide that information to our children. The other thing is to encourage them to take risks. I mean, now we have bubble kids. You know, everyone's a bubble kid. I mean, I ran all over the city wild. Now, my parents would have been in prison. We don't let children take any risks. But you know what? We become so cowardly and timid that if my parents' generation were like that, we'd all be goose-stepping to Adolf Hitler. So now there's an Adolf Hitler that's this sub rosa, Fourth Reich. And we have to have the courage to stand up to it. Now, there are costs to that. I've paid a very steep price. But I think ultimately you have to begin to embrace a bigger vision. So I'd say the first thing with our children is that it has to be a vision of being interested in something greater than themselves or their own aggrandizement or the next selfie. So it is a spiritual value, where the concern is for the future of our planet, the helping of others, and doing things even at great risk to yourself, or ridicule and estrangement from your peers, that you're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. Now that's a fundamental spiritual foundation. And based on that, then you can take on the new energy issue or the contact or whatever it is. But so long as you're looking around and concerned what other people are thinking about you, which is how most people are. I'm sort of an outlier that way. I really don't care. From fourth grade, I decided I don't care what anyone thinks of me. but I'm sort of an outlier that way. But I think that's really important, this sort of independent sense of investigating truth and willing to speak the truth and stay on your path, even if there's social condemnation, ridicule, whatever it is. And that's moral character. To me, that's moral character. And that's one of the things that needs to be taught, because just having the information about the technologies or contact isn't enough. There's this deeper moral character that we need to inculcate in our children and in our culture. And, I remember being chewed out by one of my ER doctor colleagues because I was late getting in one because a truck flipped over on the mountain. And I stopped because I'm an emergency doctor, and the thing was about to burst into flames, a tanker truck, diesel fuel everywhere. And this guy was in there, and he had a C45 fracture. He was numb from the nipples down. And and I pulled over and went in there and got him out carefully so there wouldn't be any more damage. Could have killed him. And before the thing blew up. And the guy chewed me out because I was 30 minutes late. I had the highway patrol call. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? Just drive by and let this man die? He says, yes, because you're late. And this was a fundamentalist Christian. I said, well, you ever heard of the Good Samaritan? It was astonishing to me, this sort of self-absorbed, narcissistic. So I think we have to, don't get me started. I think we have to, really teach our children and those around us by the force of example, basically. It's a dynamic force of example, that you're willing to do things that aren't always just to your own aggrandizement. And that's important. I think it's really important by teaching by example. Yes, sir?
There's compelling evidence that not just the towers, but the entire World Trade Center complex was destroyed by perhaps a directed energy type of weapon, something that was operated under technology of molecular dissociation. That seems to be very much related to what you're talking about. Have you looked at that?
I have looked at it. I have bigger fish to fry. 9/11 was terrible. We lost 3,000 people. It led to 2 huge wars and trillions of dollars. I will tell you this. I'm not going to get into specifics. I mentioned a gentleman named Richard Foch, the third highest guy, Richard Foch, at the Naval Research Labs. He was in meetings with the then Vice President of the United States, Cheney. And he said, absolutely, it was known about in advance, and there was involvement at that level. And he told me, and I have witnesses, multiple witnesses to this, that if he were to speak of this, now he's passed away, that he, his wife, his children, and his grandchildren would all be killed. That's all I'm going to say on the 9/11 issue. But there is a lot to that story. I've never shared publicly what I just said, but the man has passed away. So it's not hard to, and I think most people get into these grand conspiracy theories. Basically, all you have to do is stand down. There's constant threat. There is terrorism out there. And you don't even have to hoax an event in that case. You just have to stand down the systems that would have intercepted it. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like when you're doing a code blue, boom, clear. You say clear before you do the electric shock. So you just clear the system, let it come in and hit. Now, what I think happened on 9/11 is more like what I just described. And I have very good reason to believe that, because someone of that integrity and rank had a front row seat and knew about it. And I've never spoken of this before right now, but I think that it's disturbing. It's enraging, but it's a minor rounding error compared to what's coming if we don't end this cartel's hegemony on the secrecy related to UFOs, ETs, what have you. 9/11 is going to be a very minor blip on the screen. So that's my warning to people. You can take it or not. But I've known what you just asked about since it happened. My whole security team lit up like you wouldn't believe when that happened. Yes, yes, ma'am.
I myself have had, contact with benevolent entities that
They're all benevolent, by the way.
I would call them angelic if I was going to describe it, like not physical, like they are
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, I would say any interstellar civilization has achieved a level of consciousness, even when they're fully in the physical form, to be at that level of feeling. Those are the contact experiences I've had. But I think that one thing that doesn't work is like when we go to Afghanistan and try to start Jeffersonian democracy amongst warlords that are living in the medieval time. These civilizations are not going to come here. Now, I think if things got very, very bad, there would be a massive intervention, honestly. But I think let's avoid that. Let's not just sit on our hands and let things collapse. Let's actually take the world where it is and turn it and put it on the path of our dreams. Let's dream a beautiful future and create that future. And if we do that, there's going to be help in many dimensions, spiritual, extraterrestrial, and human, that will come into play. But we have to do it, and I really think those of us who have this information are the ones who are responsible for achieving it. We're out of time. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate you. God bless you all.